Hi everyone, I'm Jagdish. I have 12 plus years of experience across healthcare and pharmacovigilance, and over the years, I have worked in agile, scrum, and project delivery management. One thing I have realized is that knowing project management terminology is not enough. You need to understand how a project actually moves from a business problem to a delivered outcome. In this series, I'm going to share that journey using one practical example, metro automation. The example is based on the type of project thinking I've experienced in my career, but I will keep all project specific and confidential information generic. In the previous video, we established the business need and initiated the project. Now, the project is approved, and the real question is how do we turn that scope into a realistic plan? That is exactly what we are going to cover today. If someone gave you an approved project today and asked why, when will it be completed, and how much will it cost? Would you be able to answer it confidently? By the end of this video, you should have a framework for answering the question. Let's start with the project planning, turning scope into a realistic delivery plan. I want to start with this quote. Give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, and I will spend the first 4 hours sharpening the axe. Quote by Abraham Lincoln. Because planning is sometimes misunderstood. People think that when a team is planning, they are not delivering. I have learned the opposite. The more complex the project, the more important is to spend enough time understanding the work, dependencies, estimates, and risks before committing to dates and cost. We should not aim for a perfect plan because project changes. We should aim for credible baseline that helps the team make decisions. So throughout this video, keep one thought in mind. Planning is not about predicting the future perfectly. It is about reducing uncertainty enough to make a responsible commitment. Where are we in the project story? In video 1, we asked why the business needs a change. In video 2, we converted that approved need into a initiated project with scope, stakeholders, governance, and boundaries. Now we move from why and what to how will we deliver. As a project manager, I would now ask what exactly needs to be done? What is the sequence? Who needs to do it? How much effort is involved? What resources are available? What dependencies exist? How long would it take? How much could it cost? And what risks could affect the plan? These questions are interconnected. If I change one, other parts of the plan may change too. This is why project planning is more than creating a Gantt chart. Now, let's move to the next one is what is project planning? Project planning converts approved scope into a delivery speech. First, we work. First is work. We need to understand the work through the WS and the activities. Second, is time. We need durations, sequencing, schedule, dependencies, and milestone. Third is people. We need the right skills and enough capacity, resources, and ownership. Fourth is money. We need estimates and then approved budget. Fifth is control. We need to think about risks, quality, and how changes will be handled. And finally, communication. Different communications need different information at different points. As a project manager, we need to understand who needs what when. In my experience, this cannot be planned independently. For example, if an SME is available 30% of the time, that can affect the schedule. If the schedule changes, cost may change. If the scope changes, the WS and estimates may change. That is the integrated thinking I want you to develop. Start with the WS. Break approved scope into a manageable deliverables and work. Before I put dates into a project plan, I want to understand the work. The work breakdown structure is the bridge between the scope and execution. For our major, for our Medra automation example, I might start with the major deliverables such as requirements, design, build, integration, testing, UAT, and deployment. Then I break those into work packages and activities at a level that allows the team to estimate and own the work. The important point is that the WS is not simply a list of tasks, it is structured decomposition of a project scope. If an interviewer asks, how do you create a project plan? I would say I start with the approved scope and decompose into deliverables and manageable work packages before estimating and scheduling. That answer demonstrate planning logic rather than just tool knowledge. WS example. Don't plan at one big level. Imagine I put one line in my plan UAT for 2 weeks. What does that actually tell me? Not much. Instead, I may have test preparation, test scenario, execution, defect, triage, retesting, evidence collection, and sign off. Now I can ask useful questions. Who owns each part? What effort is required? What dependencies exist? What can delay UAT? What evidence is required? But there is also a trap: over planning. If I create hundreds of tiny tasks that nobody can meaningfully track, the plan becomes difficult to maintain. So, my rule is decompose to a level where work can be estimated, assigned, tracked, and controlled. This is the practical project manager judgment call. Now, coming to the next slide, that is estimation. How much effort will the work require? Now that we know the work, the next question is how much. This is where estimation comes in. Expert judgment is useful when experienced SMEs or leads understands the work well. Analogous estimation looks at similar work we have completed before. Parametric estimation uses a Measurable relationship, for example, effort per interface or effort per item, where that relationship is reliable. Bottom up estimation, estimate components and aggregate. 3 is useful when we estimate smaller components and aggregate them. 3 point estimation is useful when uncertainty is significant. The important lesson from my experience is that an estimate should have a rational. I would never want to tell leadership this will take 6 weeks without being able to explain what that 6 weeks represents. In an interview, always explain the context, the technique behind assumption, uncertainty, and behind your estimate. Explain why you chose the technique, not just the name. Coming to the 3 point estimation. 3 point estimation recognizes that the future is uncertain. Optimistic means best reasonable scenario, not an unrealistic fantasy. Most likely, what we reasonably expect under normal condition. Pessimistic means a difficult but still reasonable scenarios considering dependencies, rework, or other known uncertainties. PERT style formula, that is O plus 4m plus P divided by 6, shown here is one way to calculate a weighted expected estimate. But I want to emphasize something. The formula is not most important part. The conversation behind the numbers is more valuable. If my optimistic estimate is 3 weeks and pessimistic estimate is 8 weeks, I should ask why there is such range. Maybe we depend on another team, maybe requirements are unclear, maybe technical feasibility is uncertain. Those discussions help us identify risks, assumptions that and dependencies that can be managed or should be managed. Now, coming to the resource planning, the right work needs the right people, skills, and capacity. Now we have the estimates, but who is going to do the work? This is where the resource planning becomes important. For our Medra automation example, we could need a business PVSMEs, project manager, developers and configurators, quality assurance and testers, validation or compliance specialist, integration or data specialist, business users, and training or change support. But there are two separate questions. First, do we have the required skills? Second, do those people actually have the capacity when we need them? Someone being assigned to a project does not mean they are available full time. For example, a SME may support 3 projects. If I schedule critical requirements workshop during their peak workload, my schedule is already at risk. Coming to next slide, that is building the schedule. Once I understand the work, estimates, resources, and dependencies, I can start building the schedule. The schedule should show the logical flow of work. For example, requirements generally need to reach an appropriate level of clarity before design. development, or building depends on the design. Testing depends on the testable solution and environment readiness. UAT depends on the appropriate solution. Test data users and entry criteria. Go live depends on readiness and approvals. So I simply assign arbitrary dates. I look at activity duration, sequence, dependencies, resource availability, milestones, entry and exit criteria where relevant. This is how a schedule becomes a model of how the project can actually be delivered. Critical path. What is this critical path? What can move the finish date? Now, this is the path. Imagine that most activities have flexibility, but a few activities directly determine the earliest possible finish date. Those activities from a part of the critic form a, those activities form a part of the critical path. As a project manager, I want to know where risk scheduled risk is concentrated. For example, if a critical integration activity takes longer than expected, that may push testing, UAT, and ultimately go live. That does not mean every critical path delay automatically means the project must slip. I can investigate corrective actions such as resequencing the work, adding capacity, removing blockers, or changing the approach where feasible. The interview question could be: how do you manage schedule risk? A strong answer would connect dependencies, critical activities, monitoring, corrective action rather than simply say I track the Gantt chart. Budgeting, coming to the budgeting part. Now we come to one of the areas many aspiring project managers feel less confident about budgeting. Budgeting is not about picking a number that sounds reasonable. The budgeting should be traceable to the work and resources. For example, we may have people, internal or external resource, cost, effort, technology or license, environments or tools, vendor services or implementations, training and other project cost or training enablement, training adoption, contingency, allowance for identified uncertainty. I would start with the approved scope, WS estimates, and resource plan. Then I would work with appropriate finance, sponsor, and organizational processes to translate into a project budget. The project manager may not personally own every financial calculation, but the project manager should understand how the budget was constructed and what assumptions drive it. This is what I would communicate in an interview. Budget should connect back to a scope, estimates, resource, and assumptions. Coming to the next one, that is cost baseline. Once the project budget is reviewed and approved, we need a reference point against which cost performance can be measured. That is the purpose of the cost baseline. Think about this. If I tell you that we've spent $1 million, is that a good or bad. You cannot answer without knowing what we plan to spend by that point. If the approved time phased baseline said we should have spent $500,000 and we have spent $1 million, we need to investigate. Baseline. Approved time phase project budget used to measure cost performance. Why it matters without a baseline, under or over budget has no meaningful reference. Coming to the next slide, that is contingency, risk budget and contingency and a management reserve. Uncertainty is a part of every project. So organizations may plan financial or schedule allowances according to their governance model. Contingencies is generally associated with identified uncertainties or risks. For example, if we know an integration dependency has some probability of causing additional work, the project may have an approved contingency approach for that uncertainty. Management reserve is a separate concept often used for unforeseen organization by some organizations within overall project funding subject to governance. Interview tip. Explain the concept and follow your organization's financial governance. I would not treat either as a money the project manager can casually spend. The key interview point is that to determine that you understand the difference and the financial decisions follow organizational governance. If your organization uses different terminology, always use your organization definitions and controls. Coming to the next one, that is quality planning. Don't wait until testing to think about quality. In a regulated environment, quality some cannot be something we check only at the end. For our Medra automation example, we need to think about quality from the planning stage. What does acceptable coding accuracy means? What validation or compliance expectations apply? What test evidences is needed? What are the acceptance criteria? Who will approve the result? What happens when the system cannot connect confidently? Automate a coding decision. These questions influence requirements, UAT, testing, and deployment readiness. As a project manager, I don't own every technical quality decision, but I make sure quality expectations are visible, owned, and incorporated into the plan. This is the important decision. Communication plan. Coming to the communication plan, here is a question I often ask myself. If I send the same status report to everyone, am I really communicating effectively? Probably not. A sponsor may want overall health, key risk, decisions required, and business outcomes. A delivery team may need detailed blockers, dependencies, and upcoming activities. Business users may need information about UAT, training, and readiness. So, communication planning answers four questions. Who needs information? What information? When? Through which channel? The goal is not more meetings. The goal is timely information that helps someone make a decision, perform work, or understand what is happening. That is how I would explain communication planning, a practical project manager perspective. Who, that is sponsor, team, SMEs, users, what, status, risks, decision changes, when, daily, weekly, milestone based, how, meeting, dashboard, email, report. Good communication is not more meetings, it is the right information to the right people at the right time. The integrated project plan. This is where I want you to connect everything we have discussed. Suppose the business increases scope. What happens? WS changes. Additional effort may be required. Resources may change. Schedule may extend. Cost may increase. New risks may appear. Testing and quality activities may change. Communication to stakeholders becomes necessary. This is why I don't see scope, schedule, budget, and resources as a separate islands. They are connected. This integrated thinking is one of the biggest difference between simply maintaining a project schedule and actually managing a project. If you remember only one idea from this video, remember this slide. All of these need to work together. Scope change, effort changes, schedule may change, resource may change, cost may change, risks may change. Plan, review, and baseline. Before I treat a project plan as the commitment, I want the people who will execute it to challenge it. I would review, are the estimates realistic? Are resources available? Are dependencies identified? Are assumptions valid? Are milestones achievable? Are risks addressed? Does the project budget align with the project plan? This is where the team and stakeholder is extremely valuable. Once the appropriate stakeholders agree, the organization can establish the relevant business. After that, changes should be managed through the agreed change control process rather than silently changing the plan. That creates accountability and makes later variance decisions meaningful. Review is check feasibility, assumptions, dependencies, resource capacity, and risk. Approval is agree on the plan, establish approved baseline according to the governance. Project manager's role during planning. One thing I want to make clear, especially if you're transitioning from a scrum master or a agile roles into a project management, the project manager does not need to personally perform every specialist activity. I may not be the person who estimate the technical work. I may not create every test estimate. I may not calculate every finance figure. My responsibility is to create the environment for a credible plan. I bring the right people together. I facilitate decomposition. I challenge assumptions, estimates. I coordinate estimates. I validate resource capacity. I validate resource dependencies. I connect resource to the schedule. I integrate budget, risks, quality, and communication. I facilitate stakeholder review and I make the approval happen. This is the project leadership. The project manager may not create every estimate personally. The project manager creates the conditions for a credibly integrated plan. Now, coming to the interview questions. Don't memorize these questions and memorize definitions. Instead, choose one project from your own career and prepare a real example. For how do you create a FVS? How do you create a project plan? What estimation techniques have you used? How do you estimate resources? How do you build a schedule? What is the critical path? How do you develop a project's budget? What is a cost baseline? What is a contingency reserve? How do you handle a unrealistic estimate? Explain. Do ensure that you explain what whenever there is a question asked. How do you create a WS? Explain what your project was, how you broke down the scope and why. How do you, for a question, how do you estimate? Explain who provided the estimate, what technique you used, and how you handled uncertainty. And how do you manage an unrealistic estimate? Explain how you challenge the assumption, involved the right stakeholders, and reach the realistic commitment. A good project manager interview answer sounds like experience. Use this structure, situation, approach, why, result, and what you learned. Finally, what you learned part can make your answer much more personal and credible. Now, I want you to stop watching for a moment and become the project manager. You have an approved Medra automation project. You have 6 months. Your scenario SMEs have limited availability. You have integration and validation dependencies. I would like to go through the scenario once more. The metro automation project is approved. Go live is targeted in 6 months. You have a cross-functional team, limited SME availability, and dependencies on integration and validations. What you do first? Don't jump into straight to a date. Start with WS, then estimate, then validate resources, then map dependencies, then build milestones, then identifies critical activities, then translate effort into cost, then think about budget and think about contingency, quality, UAT, communication, monitoring. Finally, establish how you will monitor the plan. If you can explain that sequence in your own words, you are already practicing for a project manager interview. You can also pause this video, take a picture, piece of paper, and actually build a first level project plan. What should I take away from this video? Let me summarize it. Let's bring everything together. Planning starts with a WS because we need to understand the work. We estimate the work. We check the right people and capacity are available. We build the schedule around sequence, budget, dependencies, and milestone. We translate the resource and work requirements into a budget. We establish baseline and plan on uncertainty for uncertainty, and we make quality and communication part of a plan rather than afterthoughts. If you take only one thing from today's video, remember this: a project plan is not a list of dates, it is a realistic communication between scope, work, people, time, money, and risks and quality. And this is exactly how I am approaching my own project management learning journey. I'm not trying to memorize project manager terminology, management terminology. I'm taking situations I've experienced in my career and connecting them to the project way of project manager should think. In the next video, we will move from planning into execution. We will talk about what happens when the planning plan meets reality, how I should set up the team, start delivery, track progress, manage stakeholders, handle blockers, and keep the project moving. If you are preparing for a project manager interview, transitioning from a scrum master or a agile delivery into a project management, or simply want to understand how projects are actually managed, stay with me for the next video. If this video helped you, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so that you don't miss the next part of the series. And before you go, think about one project from your own career and ask yourself, could I explain how I planned it from scope to budget? If your answer is not yet, don't worry. That's exactly what we are going to build together in this series. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next video.